Consider this Rubik's Cube. Now, think about the fact that as it is right now, it is already solved. But then, if I were to scramble it in this way and then just say I've solved it, would it make it solved because I have said it? The fact that I have insisted and insisted and said this is how it should be when it is solved does not mean this is how it is when it's actually solved. The thing about life and truth is that we've recently begun to see an upsurge in the number of people who claim to be able to have their own truths that are different from the objective truth. Now, the reason why this has started to happen is because people want to learn to get away with things, and they've realized that the only way to get away with stuff is by inventing their truths. Truth as is defined is objective. Truth cannot be subjective to someone's interpretation. However, perspective can differ, but truth always stays the same. I can't just wake up one day and say 2 plus 2 is now 25. It does not make it correct. No matter how much I believe in it, I will be called delusional. And it's the same thing across multiple fields. You don't just wake up and begin to claim truths like that simply because you have an agenda you're trying to push. Truth remains truth always. And so in this episode, I'm just going to take you through a series of thought patterns to teach you how to interpret truth and how to always know what direction truth should lead you and how to subject yourself, most importantly, to truth, not to subject truth to yourself. So let's just take a look at it from this perspective. So there's this gambit that I developed. Okay, it's more of a thought experiment. So it's called the proof of fact of proof gambit. And I'm just going to explain to you and then tell you how you can use it to interpret truth, and then we'll move on from there. Now, this gambit assumes that in the world, everyone was entitled to their truths. And if everyone was entitled to their truths, it would also follow that my truth is valid. Your truth is also valid. Whether or not our truths are different or the same does not matter. That I can have a truth makes it valid. So keep that as an assumption in your mind that everybody's truth is valid. So based on this, imagine if a man were to walk into Aso Rock and proclaim that he's the president of Nigeria. Because we have all agreed that everyone's truth is valid, then by virtue of his proclamation it would demand that we make him the president. Because if his truth is valid, then reality must bend to suit his truth. And if he has said that he's the president, then reality has to fit into his narrative. And then we make him president. And then everyone just realizes that, wow, so he has gotten his truth. Then everybody starts proclaiming their own truths and demanding that it should be respected. Flat earthers claim the earth is flat, and then they insist the earth should suddenly become flat because of that. And then there will just become chaos everywhere. The reason this chaos would arise is because everyone will finally realize that in the presence of too many different truths, there will be inevitable conflicts of realities, because I cannot impress upon you my reality and you impress upon me your reality, even when there are areas that do not intersect. It will just be chaos. And so that's the inherent flaw. If you examine that gambit, you'd see the inherent flaw in claiming that everyone is entitled to their truth. Everyone is not entitled to their truths. There are truths everywhere that are objectively established about how the world works and how things work generally that must be obeyed. If you want to build a car, you will not start by assuming that the car can fly because you want it to be able to fly. You would have to put in parts that will enable it to fly. You don't just feel like it can fly and then it starts flying. That's not how the world works. So why would someone just feel like they are female and then expect everybody to assume that they are female, even though they are genetically and biologically male? Truths are objective, and there are, of course, also objective standards of measuring truths. Because if a truth is objective, you must be able to measure it objectively. And the best way to look at life, if you actually wanted to get the most out of it, is through a principle-driven manner. And what does that mean? It means that for every single concept, experience, observation that you encounter, what you want to do is examine it under the lenses of the truths, of the principles that govern the situation. So For instance, let's say you're considering the way a bird flies. There'll be principles of aerodynamics, there'll be principles of gravity you'd have to take into consideration to understand its speed, to understand how it's able to stay up there for so long. You would have to consider these principles. You can't just assume that it flies because of magic. I know it may seem like an exciting thought to you, but you cannot just assume that simply because you want it to be so. In the medical field, you'll be taught to be delusional. That's exactly what the diagnosis for you would be. You don't just assume truths and then project and impose them upon the reality that surrounds you. Truth by itself and in its very nature is objective. However, we can have multiple perspectives to the truth. Your perspective may be valid or invalid, but the truth itself stays objective, and it is the truth that determines your behavior, not the other way around. You don't determine how the truth behaves. The truth determines how you behave. Because of the way gravity works, you don't determine that you can just walk off a building and you would float. It is gravity that will tell you that you would fall to your death. That's actually how life works. When you begin to realize that we are subject to the principles that govern nature and not the other way around, then you begin to see things clearly. Now, of course, if you want to examine this in its full sense, you'd want to look at the governing principles of multiple disciplines. But if we just decided that, let's say, for day-to-day living, let's just examine the governing principles of things like conversations, communication, of interpersonal relationships and things like that. There are principles that govern all of these things. Principles don't only exist in the realm of chemistry, physics, and biology. They also exist in the realm of psychology, in the way you think, the way you talk, and just behave towards other people. There are principles that govern these things. If you were to understand these principles, then you can behave in a way that is objectively and situationally relevant. And you can always ensure you get the better of the other person in every situation. But that's a conversation for another day. But in this episode, I just want to take you through the practice of thinking in a principle-driven manner, in a manner that ensures you can examine every thought. So I'll just give an example. So there is this very common correlation phenomenon about how that in the summer, ice cream sales go up and shark attacks also go up. We all know that. Now, if you look at it, there's a correlation between ice cream sales and shark attacks in the summer. One could assume that because of this data that has been presented to them, then it means that consumption of ice cream leads to sharks attacking people, or sharks attacking people leads to people consuming more ice cream. You can actually use this to perpetuate an agenda. You can use this to do so many things by simply deciding to interpret the information in the way you want. However, in the presence of a confounding variable like the weather, it immediately becomes clear that the reason for both the increase in consumption of ice cream and the increase in shark attacks is the weather. Because during summer, there are more people at the beach, and because there are more people at the beach, there's more people for the sharks to choose from. There's also more people to consume ice cream. So that's just what the weather does. So the weather is the cause of both effects that have been noticed. It is not one that caused the other. However, someone who wants to perpetuate an agenda would go and lie and say that it is because of this one that we have the other one. And they would draw a causal relationship between two, distantly related phenomena, because they're not related in terms of a causal relationship. They're just related in terms of correlation. So this happens as this happens. This doesn't happen because of this other one. That's what the difference is. But people use this quite expertly to deceive large numbers of people. One thing they do is something called the false equivalence fallacy. So someone may draw a relationship between two things that on a normal day are unrelated, but they will try to show you that because an orange is a fruit and an apple is a fruit, they have so much in common. That means when you consume both of them, you're expected to see the exact same effects. And they just draw this causal relationship between both of them and tell you, yes, they are equivalent to each other, and they expect you don't mind that I'm using apples and oranges. There are actually a lot more things that go behind these things. Like there are bigger agendas that people try to push using this kind of policy, but I'm trying to push it in a very simple and basic way so you can understand. And so they'll come up with things like this and then tell you this is actually why this is happening. I'll just give you an even more interesting example. So in some states in Nigeria, there's this common practice of people bringing some computers to maybe marketplaces and claiming that these computers can diagnose any illness in a person. And once it diagnoses it, there's a way in which they will filter and flush your blood of the bad things that have been in it. And here is one way they do it. They would invite somebody, and the machine is already programmed to give a set of problems to just show some diagnosis. So they would invite somebody, connect the person to the machine, and then it says blood is bad, this is bad, so many things are bad. And they say they need to flush your blood. And because you've seen the results, you believe them. And then they decide to flush your blood, they'll connect you to a drip. But before they flush the blood, they would give you a medication called rifampicin. Then they would also go ahead and give you a diuretic. That's an agent that causes you to pee. Now, the thing about rifampicin is that it makes the urine in anybody turn dark orange, or just dark orange or reddish, close to amber, the color of urine, but a darker color. And so once they've connected the person to the drip and given the person an agent that causes them to urinate, next thing, in the next 20 to 30 minutes, the person feels like urinating. And indeed, once the person goes to urinate, they're urinating a very dark colored urine. And they get scared and they're like, wow, so all of this bad thing was inside my blood. And they're excited that they've actually passed out the bad things in the blood. Now, these people who run this scam just understand how these things work. However, to the unwitting people who get scammed, to the unwitting victims, what happens is they believe there's a causal relationship between that diagnostic machine and the urine that they passed out. So you see how that they've been able to draw a causal relationship when none actually existed, simply by knowing how to tell the story right. That's what governments and certain people in power do to entire societies. They know that you want to believe something is true. So they use that, your desire to see a story in everything, which is actually called narrative bias. And they are excited, they reel you in, and then they just draw something from somewhere and say, this is what led to this, and this is why we now have this. And because you've been desiring to see a story, you're excited, and you say there's actually a story here. That means these people must be saying the truth. Whereas they're actually carrying out the real evil behind you or elsewhere, and you're oblivious to it. These things are possible because the average person would rather examine truths from a subjective perspective rather than from an objective perspective. Truths, by their very nature, are objective. And if you can understand this and begin to see life like this, you'd be able to ask the right questions. Why is this so? Why am I observing this in this way and in this other way I'm not observing it? You'd be able to see that, yes, there may be a correlation between two things, but is there a causal relationship? Does this cause this? Yes, we've noticed that consumption of this, people who consume this particular food a lot tend to have this particular illness. Is it a coincidence, or is there an actual causal relationship? Now, because these people know you want to see a causal relationship, they'll push the data out there and allow you to interpret it. Then you go ahead and interpret it and say, this is why we're having a lot of this. Then these same people who have done a proper study to show that there's no causal relationship will now bring out the proper study and say that you're a conspiracy theorist because you actually thought this was true and you went out saying this was true. Now, once they've branded you a conspiracy theorist, they can go around doing the real evil they want to do in another sector, but they've proven objectively that you're a conspiracy theorist because they had proper research to back up theirs, while all you had was a story that seemed to fit a narrative. So don't let anybody play you for a fool. Begin to reason in a principle-driven manner. And I'll just give you a few tips on how you can reason in a principle-driven manner. The first thing you want to do is identify the core principles of that particular, let's just assume it's a conversation, and you're having a conversation about maybe a topic like hypertension now in young people. So the first thing you want to do is identify the governing principles of the particular keyword in the topic, and which would be hypertension. And then you want to see what causes hypertension, what are the principles that affect the way blood flows and increases blood pressure in blood vessels and things like that. Next thing you want to do is clearly outline the goals of that conversation and the goals of your search. So what do you want to achieve out of this? Do you want to properly see a causal relationship? Do you want to identify maybe correlating factors? Do you want to identify risk factors? What do you want to identify? Once you've put that aside, next thing you want to do is now begin to draw a line of causal reasoning between all of the, I'll call them substrates, and then the eventual effect. So on this side, we've said these things have been said to cause hypertension, and on this other side, we see the actual effects of hypertension. So you want to now, this is not stuff for a conversation, by the way, this is a full research project. So you want to now see on this side, these things that have been said to cause it, what do they contain, what's their chemical makeup, and then how do these things affect the chemical constitution of the human body. This is the way the human body behaves on a normal day. When you introduce these compounds, how does it change this? And does it change only this? Or is there something else that it activates in the human body that causes overproduction of this and then leads to this? As basic as what I'm telling you sounds, most people go into research projects to prove an already believed concept or notion. So they go in with confirmation bias. So they don't give themselves the luxury of objective reasoning. And so they already have answers to questions that they haven't even asked. So once they go there and they start seeing new questions pop up, they already have an answer for it because they went into that research project hoping to prove something. I once read a research paper. In fact, I was having an argument with my friends, which is something I do a lot. And we're just talking about the reason why in most regions in Nigeria, people still circumcise children on either the 7th or 8th day, and whether there's any proper medical reason to it. And I just tried to do some research. Now, I found a paper written by a Christian who quoted scripture. Now, this was a medical doctor, by the way, quoted scripture and also quoted some things from his research, and then eventually was able to just tie one rope from here, tie another rope from here, and eventually just say, yes, there actually is a medical reason for this. Whereas, if you actually read that paper properly, which I did, you would see that the person was just drawing causal relationships where there was just correlation and trying to form a narrative because the person started from an answer to the question. And the person's answer was already that there is a reason why you must do it on the 7th or 8th day. So the person was looking for every element to try and point to that answer. The person wasn't looking for an objective answer. And that's how most researches are carried out. Forget it. No matter how intelligent the person is or how renowned the institution is, if there is an agenda to agenda, then there will be people to tell the story that the data is not really telling. They will just bring up some data together and begin to say, oh, hey, look, this person claims we shouldn't vaccinate, but this person has vaccinated for this. This person claims we shouldn't do this, but this person has done this. There's just so many ways to pull together information that you shouldn't be too quick to believe there is a story in everything. You shouldn't be too quick to believe there is a causal relationship. Pause and examine the facts in the right way, and every situation you would always expose where the lie is. And one of the commonest lie that is told using that false equivalence fallacy that I mentioned earlier. There are expert ways of pitching two things together and claiming that they have the exact same characteristics even when they really do not. It's something that you should just run away from. Whenever you see people trying to say this also has this, you want to try and examine both things and examine their modular properties, that's their unit-based properties. Do they behave the same way when broken apart? Do they behave the same way at the molecular level? Or is this just something that the person has put together to form a narrative, to push an agenda to you? So this is one of the best ways to actually just go through this. So if you practice this often, you find out that you learn to ask the right questions, you learn to see proper patterns, and you learn to discard stories where they actually are not. Because trust me, one of the easiest ways that societies that want to push agendas do it is by painting people who can see the truth in a bad light. And the only way they can do it is by objectively showing that you actually are saying something wrong. So they'll catch you in a mistake, but they'll be the ones who would have created the mistake in the first place. And they'll use that mistake to catch you, whereas they'll be using another means to prove that there is something else that exists that you didn't see. So it's just something that you should, if you want to be a leader in an organization, in any field, you want to push forward a notion, you want to be a thought leader, you have to learn to think in a principle driven manner. It's something that everybody needs to learn. You cannot just leave yourself to think, as the wind blows. You have to learn structured thinking patterns. And it's something that I know that if everybody learns, eventually would have a saner society, would have a society that appreciates what should be appreciated and discards what shouldn't be. Would have a society in which when people push for an agenda, we can ask them the right questions, we can ask to see the data, and we can properly scrutinize the data. Because sometimes people can just say there is research that shows this, but have you scrutinized the research? Recently, I was on social media and I saw somebody talking about research that she had read that said that a lot of the stories that are told about climate change aren't told the right way because there's actual clear data, and she put links to the data, and I've looked at a number of the research papers she puts, and they actually make sense. So there are people who are pushing out an agenda about climate change, not that it's not happening, but the way they are interpreting what is happening is actually not what the books say. They claim this is the hottest, this is the coldest, this is the warmest we've ever experienced, whereas there's actually data to show that these things just happen in cycles, and it's not the hottest we've ever had, it's not the coldest we've ever had, this is not the worst, this not, like, there's just so much data to show that the way they interpret that data is actually wrong. That climate change is happening is actually correct, but that it is happening in the way they are painting it is where there's some shady business being done. But why can't they get away with this? Because people don't read journals, people don't read research papers, people rather just Google. And now that Google has this AI summary, you don't even need to click on any search results. From there you can just see all the biases that other people have put together and then read and soak in all that information that will just push you towards unpolarized area, whether the left or the right, and you find yourself stuck in a loop. Try to read research. Just give yourself some time to read research, and not just read research in a proper way. Look at the amount of people that were in the study, the participants in the study. Someone can use maybe 5 participants for a study and say, my study showed that 90% of people had so and so when giving this. It is correct. Do you understand? So if you were to read that study, or at least that line that 90% of people, when they consume this food, they came up with this, that is correct. But the sample size is invalid. So while you could have just gone further to read more about the research, and they know you wouldn't, they know you don't want to check sample size, they know you don't even have the patience to read the abstract. So they know that they can paint these stories any way they want and tell the, spin up narratives any way they want, because even after you've heard me say these things, you're still probably not going to read the next research paper. If you are in an argument with somebody, or you want to prove a point, or you're trying to write a speech, you still wouldn't do the research necessary. You would still want to just get information that makes that confirms stuff you've already believed. Try to think in a principle-driven manner, and you'd be the better for it. Now, this is something I cover extensively in my master classes, and if you want to learn more about principle-driven thought formulation and other methodologies for thinking in a more intelligent and holistic manner, then you should definitely sign up for my master classes. Thank you so much for being on this journey with me. Until we meet again, bye.